talk to you about affordability and autonomy. Affordability in particular about food, and autonomy for our military. There were two developments today that I felt the need to respond to. One, this morning we got some terrible news from Statistics Canada that food price inflation has now hit a spectacular 7.3%, by far the worst in the G7, twice what it is in the United States, and twice what it was when Mr. Carney took office. He promised that he would be judged by the prices at the grocery store, and here we are a year later, and those prices are rising at a world-leading rate. Canadians deserve affordable food that they can enjoy with their families, food that will nourish their bodies, not hunger and desperation. What we have now is a hunger crisis in this country. 2.2 million people lined up at food banks. We've seen food prices rise at near record rates, and that those prices are accelerating. And so I wrote the Prime Minister a letter today proposing emergency measures to reverse the inflationary policies that the Prime Minister and the Liberals have imposed.
There you have it, guys. Today is Wednesday, February 18th. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. This is Canuck News. Have a great story. It kind of ties into what we talked about yesterday to a bit of a degree. Elaborates on it a bit. But basically what's happening is Canada's saying that it's too dependent on U.S. military equipment, guys. And now the government is actually trying to double domestic defense sourcing, apparently to reduce U.S. reliance and create 125,000 jobs over the next decade, guys. It sounds a little ambitious, not gonna lie, it sounds a little ambitious. In principle, strengthening Canada's, obviously, defense industry makes perfect sense, and we need to have a sovereign defense industry. As a quick example, Norway, a country of 5 million, has its own defense manufacturing. They build their own subs. Obviously, it's with a conglomerate of with the Germans, but they build their own tanks. They build their own APCs and that type of stuff. Why can't Canada? If we look at the Swedes, Sweden's a nation of 20 million people. They build their own tanks. They build their own planes, fighter jets, as well as surveillance planes. Why doesn't Canada? Why don't we have that same kind of military industrial capacity? We just don't do it. We've built our entire capacities on sourcing. It's all about sourcing. That's all we ever talk about. Whether it's US sourcing, whether it's European, it's always about something being sourced. It's never about Canadian manufacturing. So what they're proposing is ambitious. Can it happen? Execution is a completely different thing. Let's go through the article, see what you guys think. It was Prime Minister Mark Carney says his new strategy to rebuild Canada's defense industry by doubling the share of Ottawa's military spending that goes to domestic suppliers will reduce reliance on the U.S. for such equipment at a time of heightened concern that U.S. dependence makes Canada vulnerable. Since taking office, Mr. Carney has complained about the fact that 3/4 of government spending on defense capital outlays such as major weapons platforms goes to U.S. suppliers, even as Canada's neighbor has become increasingly protectionist under President Donald Trump. On Tuesday, Mr. Carney unveiled a defense industrial strategy to build up Canadian self-sufficiency across 10 categories of sovereign capabilities, from ammunition, aerospace, to drones and artificial intelligence. The Globe and Mail and other media reported details of the strategy earlier this week. Guys, this is really a place I kind of want to stop, because they've just listed out a number of things for us. And the real question here is, what does sovereign capability mean? How are they defining sovereign capability? Because they're naming ammunition, aerospace, drones, and artificial intelligence. What happened to the other 6? Because, guys, one thing we need to understand is sovereignty in defense isn't symbolic. It's, are we designing it? Are we building it? Can we repair it? And can we sustain it during a conflict without foreign permission? That is what sovereignty means. Because right now, Canada operates the F-35 fighter jets. We're manufacturing parts for them. We operate the P-8 maritime patrol aircraft as well. And we're deeply integrated into NORAD systems. So our procurement model was built around interoperability with the US. Guys, that's not an accident. That's continental defense architecture, guys. So moving to 70% domestic sourcing isn't just a policy tweak. It means we have to start developing full spectrum industrial depth, or we're going to be assembling allied systems under a license and call it sovereignty. And those are very different realities. The assumptions that defined decades of Canadian defense and foreign policy have been turned upside down, Mr. Carney said at a news conference in Montreal. Over the last few decades, Canada has neither spent enough on our defense nor invested enough in our defense industries. We've relied too heavily on our geography and others to protect us. This has created vulnerabilities that we can no longer afford and dependencies that we can no longer sustain. I actually agree with this. I wholeheartedly agree with this. I actually agree with Mark Carney on this completely. This is just laziness. I've talked about it several times. This is just pure political laziness that's been going on for decades on the part of the Canadian government. Mr. Carney said there are many strengths to the defense partnership Canada has with the United States, but it is a dependency, he added. He said Ottawa will turn the situation around by building up our defense capabilities here and our other partnerships abroad. We need to have a sovereign defense industry, military industrial complex of our own, but we need to stay integrated in this partnership with the US for a number of reasons. We're on the same continent. We need to defend this continent together. We can't do that with Europe. Europe has their own problems. Europe's in a more central role around the world. They have Africa right below them. They're connected to the Asian subcontinent. They have their whole different set of problems. We're on the same continent with the US and with Mexico, and we need to build tight integrations with them. But we need to be manufacturing our own military stuff, because otherwise we're just going to be reliant on somebody else to give us weapons. That's not called sovereignty. It's quite simply not. Just to continue it, he said Canada has signed more than a dozen defense partnerships on 4 continents over the past 6 months, including joining the European Union's Security Action for Europe program last week. All right, guys, this is where I kind of want to stop here, because what they're kind of doing right now is they're talking about reducing U.S. dependence without actually redefining North American defense, right? And so Carney's saying that the U.S. relationship is a dependency. It is. But he wants to build relationships abroad. Sure, that makes sense. In a more protectionist world, that makes sense. But here's the structural issue behind all of this, guys. Canada's defense posture isn't neutral. We're built into NORAD. We're built into NATO. We have these integrated missile defense systems with the U.S. We have joint air surveillance with the U.S. And you cannot just reduce that reliance on U.S. defense systems without actually redefining continental defense itself. This is the problem. Everything in this article is vague. The whole strategy is vague. And this has serious implications far beyond actual just procurement, guys. Interoperability isn't political, it's operational. We have tightly knit integrated systems with the US. And if North America is defended jointly, equipment decisions follow that logic. So if we're going to stay within this integrated network within North America, we have to have tech that works, that speaks to one another. Doesn't matter if Canada is building it domestically, it has to speak to US equipment. So the real question is this actually about building resilience within the alliance, or are we repositioning Canada politically in a fractured Western world? Because those, again, lead to very different procurement realities. It says, Mr. Carney said domestic companies supply about 1/3 of Canada's military gear. He added that he wants to more than double that by 2035, driving domestically sourced procurement to 70% of overall spending. Oh my God. Okay. Canada will continue to turn to U.S. technologies to supply some of its defense requirements. He said, our first responsibility as government is to defend Canadians. He said, we will always be choosing the best supplier for those defense needs. So he's playing with words again. We're gonna pick the supplier. 70% is going to be Canadian. For other things, it's going to be the best supplier. Yeah, obviously you want the best deal. You want the best equipment. That makes perfect sense. But are you going to be pushing to make Canadian equipment, or are you already going to start flirting with the idea of procuring what's best here and there? But he said Ottawa will demand more benefits for Canada when it partners with the U.S. suppliers. We want partnership, we want development, we want to be part of the supply chains, Mr. Carney said. So again, we have more of this contradiction going on. We can be a part of those supply chains with Canadian equipment. Our domestic equipment just needs to speak with U.S. equipment. We just have this. It's as simple as that. It's just, what are we going to produce for ourselves? We don't have our own fighter jets, so we have to buy the fighter jets for somebody. In a background briefing Tuesday, a senior federal government official told reporters that 43% of federal defense contracts are currently awarded to Canadian companies. Ottawa's new goal is 70% by 2035. The Prime Minister summed up the new strategy, backed by $6.6 billion over 5 years, as build, partner, and buy. This means Canada will increase its defense industry where possible before looking abroad for partnerships or foreign procurements. This includes the already launched Defense Investment Agency, which aims to centralize and streamline procurement for projects more than $100 million. Its mandate is to cut red tape, speed up approvals, and prioritize Canadian suppliers while ensuring faster delivery of equipment to the Canadian Armed Forces. The federal government says over 10 years, the new strategy aims to create 125,000 high-paying jobs, increase defense exports by 50%, and boost Canada defense industry revenues by 240%. Over this period, Ottawa says it will boost Canada's ability to repair and maintain its own maritime, air, and land fleets. I think this is a great place to stop, guys, because they're dropping some serious numbers here. 125,000 new defense jobs, guys. That's insane. That's massive. You're literally recreating an entire critical industry in the country. That's not a joke. And like, just for comparison, guys, Canada's entire aerospace industry right now employs 200,000 people. So you're talking about building something approaching a major industrial pillar of the economy. We'll see what that means, but right as things stand right now, if you include fighter jet assemblies, the surveillance systems, submarine maintenance, ammunition production, and AI integration, but even with those numbers, those job numbers, this is still extremely aggressive, guys. And then there's those exports, a 50% increase in defense exports, guys. To whom? Who? Europe? France, Germany, the UK, Sweden, Italy, they all have their own entrenched domestic defense giants. They procure domestically. The United States is the most protectionist defense market in the world. So who is Canada actually selling to at scale? Who are we going to sell to? Who are we going to export to? Middle powers? We just listed off a number of middle powers. Smaller NATO states? Why would they buy Canadian? Why wouldn't they buy US? Why wouldn't they buy Swedish, who's on their doorstep, like all of the European nations? Because those supply chains matter. What's left is basically these like selective tech niches that we can kind of maybe wedge ourselves into. It's possible. But the numbers are just way too optimistic, to be honest. And this isn't an easy market. Defense exports are political, guys. They're strategic and they're alliance driven. A lot of smaller nations that import defense goods, they do it to buy goodwill from a larger power. That's how defense procurements are an actual way of currying favors for someone that you need political backing from geopolitically. So this isn't like exporting lumber. If this strategy actually succeeds, it will take disciplined execution and realistic expectations, guys. Because if those numbers are inflated, Canadians are going to notice. They're going to notice immediately, guys. And this is why this really matters to Canadians, guys. Because Canada absolutely, we need to strengthen our domestic defense base. I am absolutely for this. You guys know my position. I'm an economic nationalist. I'm an overall, let's say, nationalist. I think that we need to be bolstering the domestic economy in every which way. I am a Canadian sovereigntist, and that means sovereignty in every form. And military is one of the staple blanket ways you exercise your own sovereignty. But relying on one country for 75% of capital equipment creates an extreme vulnerability. And that part is real. But sovereignty isn't just a declared It's not declared at a podium. You don't just say it on a speech. It's built through industrial capacity, guys, skilled labor, research and development depth, long-term contracts, and real export markets. Right now, in terms of the research and development, I don't know of too many companies that are actually building Canadian tank technology, Canadian sonar technologies, Canadian submarines, our shipyards are all a wreck. So I don't really know where this is coming from. So the next decade, if this all comes through, will really determine whether this is an actual structural shift in Canadian defense policy or just another ambitious projection layer over decades of dependency, guys. Is this more political posturing coming from the Liberal government, or are we actually going to see something concrete come from this liberal sovereigntist movement that we're seeing coming out of Mark Carney's rhetoric? That's all I have for you guys today. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Like, share, and subscribe. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. Stay informed, stay curious, and God bless Canada.
This is Canada. Maple